AIES to our today's AIES talk with the British ambassador. It's a great pleasure for me that you are ready to follow this talk today, because if you look outside the window, nature is just so fabulous and the temperatures are so high that I think it is really something that you will follow us. Thank you very much. And I especially want to thank, of course, our speaker, Robert Leigh Turner, was born in 1958, and he has a very specific British history. On the one hand, of course, he grew up in Great Britain, in England, and on the other hand, also in foreign countries. So it was not only in the province of Exeter, but also in Nigeria, in Lesotho, in Swaziland. And of course, this, shaped a little bit, probably also his career in the following decades. His grammar school he visited in Manchester, and afterwards he went to Downing College at Cambridge University. After having absolved his studies at this elite university, he joined British administration, at the beginning in the Department for Transport and Environment, and after a short period, then of course he switched over to diplomacy, to the Foreign Office. And in the Foreign Office he had quite an interesting career. He had, quite some periods, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. So he was working here in Vienna, in Moscow, in Berlin. He became ambassador in Ukraine, then also general counsel in Istanbul, and 1916 ambassador in Austria. Everybody who knows Leigh Turner estimates him quite a bit, I have to say. He's not only fluent in English, but also fluent in German language. And he was even ready, to make this talk in German language. And I really want to thank him for giving us the chance in a situation that has become quite interesting. Why? We have now pretty exactly 3 months after the Brexit. And we want to analyze the situation now. What are the effects? And what are the indications for the future? And therefore, the theme for today is UK's global review after Brexit. And I want to immediately go into a period of a few questions and answers. And my first question is, due to the reports we get by media, about cross and disappointed fishermen, about furious transport company managers, about a situation that the British exports broke down in January, as far as I know it, around about 20%, overall 19.3%, and more than 40% into EU, that the pound is under some pressure at least, and that economy last year shrank. It had the biggest minus since 1709. And of course, everybody knows that this is a very specific situation. I mean, after such a long period within European Union. And what we want to analyze today is what is just a short-term effect out of this divorce situation, and maybe what are the remaining, the lasting challenges. And therefore, I just want to ask my first question to Ambassador Leigh Turner. What is the real picture as far as you see it? What is serious? What is, just a turbulent situation at the moment?
Thank you very much for this question. And thank you very much for inviting me today to appear on this platform with the AIES, an excellent organization, and one that I've seen doing a great deal of good work during my nearly 5 years that I've been ambassador in Austria, one of the great privileges of diplomatic life to be ambassador in Austria. First of all, let me just say, the United Kingdom is not only geographically part of Europe, but it is and will always remain culturally, historically, and strategically a part of Europe. You know, that's not going to change. But what has changed is that back in June 2016, the British government held a referendum on whether the people of the United Kingdom wished to remain part of the European Union. And the answer was to vote to leave the European Union. And then followed a number of years of negotiation that we're all very familiar with, that led on the 31st of January 2020 to the United Kingdom legally departing from the European Union. And there's some, I mean, you can discuss whether it was right for the UK to leave the European Union or not. Of course, people have different views on that, but it was clearly the expressed will of the British people and of the British government, which was, of course, elected with a large majority of the present British government on a basis of leaving the European Union. And it's important to note that when we left the European Union on the 31st of January 2020, we did so with a negotiated agreement. This is very important because it means that a number of important legal bases are provided for our future relationship with the EU. And one that is particularly important to me is that the roughly 1 million UK citizens who live in the 27 members of the EU, plus the roughly, we don't know quite how many it is, 4.5 million citizens of those countries who live in the UK, have their rights preserved to continue to live in those countries and to carry on doing what they're doing, whether they're studying or whether they're working, whether they're retired, etc. And I've been doing a great deal of work in the last couple of years with my friends from the Interior Ministry and from the different Länder, including MR35 here in Vienna, to make sure that people can exercise their rights. So that's quite an important point. The second important point I'd make, and you mentioned departing from the internal market and the customs union on the 31st of December 2020, is that we did manage to negotiate an agreement between the EU and the UK, a trade and cooperation agreement, which set out a range of provisions to try and ensure that we could continue to trade without any customs duties and without any limits on what could be traded between the United Kingdom and the EU. However, because we had left the single market and the customs union, there are additional steps that have to be gone through for exporters between both countries, between both trading entities. And as you've quite rightly pointed out, in January, the trade figures show that there was a considerable drop in trade between the UK and the EU, as indeed between the UK and the rest of the world. And then there's the big $64,000 question, which you've expressed very nicely, is, you know, what's going to happen next? It's very difficult to separate out the effects of COVID, which, as you say, had a very major effect on the UK economy in 2020, as it did on many other economies, including, of course, Austria, to separate out those effects from the effects that may be taking place as a result of the UK leaving the European Union. And you quite quickly get quite political as to when you try to disentangle those effects and how well things are going. One thing I would say, and we've attended a number of events with our friends in the Wirtschaftskammer Österreich, for example, the WKÖ and the Industriellen Vereinigung, and with other important economic groups here, is that Austria has an enormous investment in the UK economy. There are something like 250 big Austrian companies like Zumtobel and Valneva, for example, the vaccine producer, who are have invested in the United Kingdom, and they have a united turnover of around 22 billion euro in the United Kingdom. So it's quite significant, and around 40,000 or 50,000 workers in the UK. And that's really important because Austria has a strong vested interest in the success of the UK, and vice versa. I mean, one of the things that I think it's worth bearing in mind is that whatever you think about the UK's decision to leave the EU, it is clearly in the interests of the United Kingdom that the European Union is strong and successful. And it's clearly in the interest of the European Union that the UK is strong and successful. If we look at the United Kingdom, it's got a population of roughly 67.7 million and average income of around the same as Austria. So it's a big market with a great deal to offer in many areas, which I'm sure we'll come on to. You know, there's a real win-win here that we can try to get out of this. And we very much hope that that is the approach that EU countries and the European Union as a whole will take. I mean, two just details on what you mentioned is that you mentioned the pound being under pressure. I mean, I've grown up with the pound being under pressure. That's, you know, I remember when I first went to Germany in 1973, I'm sure the pound in my pocket bought more Deutschmarks than it would buy euros now. But actually, at the moment, the pound is not particularly under pressure. The pound has been doing very well, actually, in the latest week and month. So, you know, the things are not always straightforward. But yeah, that's an initial answer to your question. So delighted to take it further.
Yeah, may I add one open question? This is the Northern Ireland question, because, well, there is no consensus between EU and Great Britain at the moment. EU even is ready to sue United Kingdom because, okay, there are different, at least different interpretations. How do you see this Northern Ireland question, the control of goods coming into the country?
I think the situation in Northern Ireland is very delicate, and it bases itself on the Good Friday Agreement, which was agreed in 1995, which brought into play the governments in London and Dublin, but also the communities in Northern Ireland, and brought to an end a long period of very severe conflict in Northern Ireland. And since that time, London and Dublin have worked together intensively, engaging the communities in Northern Ireland to try and keep the peace deal on track and to maintain stability and economic growth and acceptance of the political situation in Northern Ireland. So that is an absolute #1 priority, which is shared, as I mentioned, both in London and in Dublin, and of course in Belfast. When
yeah.
we come to, I was just going to say, when we come to negotiating the Northern Ireland Protocol, the #1 priority for the UK was to ensure that there was no new border erected between Northern Ireland and the rest of the island of Ireland. And the deal that was agreed was designed to make sure that that didn't happen. Now, at the same time, it's always very important to make sure that both the communities in Northern Ireland are fully brought into the deal, into the arrangements that are in place. And that is a matter of constant, intensive work. And there have been a number of developments which have taken place over the last couple of months. I mean, there was one point at which unfortunately, there was some suggestion from the Commission that maybe they would need to impose some kind of border checks to do with vaccines, which is a very, very unfortunate suggestion, which didn't go down well with any of the communities in Northern Ireland. And then more recently, yes, the UK has made clear that in the interests of maintaining community stability in Northern Ireland, it may need to make certain adjustments. But we believe that these are within the spirit of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And for us, the absolutely top priority is the interests of the people of Northern Ireland.
Mm-hmm. I mean, talking about those most sensitive questions leads me almost automatically also to the Scottish question. I mean, the question of independence movement in Scotland. What is your impression now? Is there an effect from Brexit to this movement, stronger, less, whatever?
There is a really lively political debate going on in the United Kingdom, both within Scotland and also between Edinburgh and London, if you like, about the case for Scottish independence. The government of Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said that it does not believe that there is a strong case for an independent Scotland, and that nor do they believe there is a strong case for a new referendum. At the same time, at least one of the parties in Scotland is campaigning strongly for a new referendum. And there will be elections shortly, which will show exactly how the state of opinion is in Scotland on that question. So it is an extremely lively debate. I like everybody else, I look at opinion polls from time to time, and since the referendum of 2014 on Scottish independence, which came out with a result, as I recall, of about 55% against independence to roughly 45% in favour. The numbers have moved around. I think for quite a while there was a general majority against independence, and then when the Brexit referendum took place, there were many people in Scotland who said, well, look, you know, one of the reasons for staying within the United Kingdom is that if we left, we would have to apply to join the European Union again. Whereas if we stayed in, we'd stay in the European Union. Whereas now that the United Kingdom has voted to leave the European Union, and a majority of Scots voted against that, that is a strong argument. Say these politicians and these people. That's a strong argument why the situation has changed. And over most of the last year or two, there has been a majority in favour of independence in opinion polls. Although, as I say, that's a dynamic situation, and just recently the polls have narrowed a bit. So, you know, let's see how that debate goes. It's a very lively debate, as I said, and one in which both in Scottish politics and in UK politics is of very great importance.
Yeah, maybe let's go back shortly to British-European relations. I mean, if I look back the last 47 years, almost half a century, of course, the United Kingdom was one of the big players within EU, one of the big three. Whenever there was a problem, whenever there was a big discussion, representatives of United Kingdom, France, and Germany would sit together and discuss more or less possible solutions. And when they found a consensus, this was a consensus for the whole of Europe that usually also was accepted by everybody. So far, United Kingdom had an enormous leading role, even when it was not so happy about getting a stronger union from day to day. On the other hand, also, this brought quite some advantages. London was not only, but became more and more the financial center, not only for Europe, but number one or at least number 2 worldwide, you have to say. And if I look now at this nowadays situation, already in January, London has lost this function. For the first time, as far as I know in history, Amsterdam had bigger transactions, had more transactions than London. London was only in the middle between Amsterdam and Paris and Frankfurt. So far, this outstanding function as financial center, a global financial center responsible more or less for the whole of Europe, certainly got lost. How do you see this relationship now under these circumstances?
Yeah, well, I remember very well attending a debate back in about 1999, I think it was, in London, when the cash euro was about to be introduced into circulation. I think it came in on the 1st of January 2001, as I recall. And the European Central Bank had just been set up in Frankfurt. And there was a debate taking place about whether this would be the end of the City of London as an important financial centre. And of course, the subsequent 20 years showed that indeed the reverse was true. So I'm always very hesitant to write off the City of London. I'll come back to that in a minute. I mean, first of all, let me just say, many of you may have read the very excellent Robert Manasseh book called Die Hauptstadt, the capital, which is a really great behind-the-scenes novel looking at or imagining life in Brussels and how it relates to the real world. I thought it was a great read, and I know Robert, and he's a great bloke. But in that book, several people have words put into their mouth in which they're critical of the role of the United Kingdom in the European Union, which I thought was a bit unfair because, as you say, when the UK was in the EU, it played a very positive role in many areas. I mean, who can forget the reform of the common agricultural policy so that it didn't any longer consume 75% of the budget every year, or indeed the reform of the budget, in which I played my small part back in 1989 when I was working on reform of the budget and the own resources ceiling in the Foreign Office, or indeed the introduction of the Binnenmarkt, the single market, which was more or less a British invention, or the expansion of the European Union, of which the UK was a strong supporter. Not to mention, as you slightly implied, the role of the United Kingdom as a supporter of free trade and as a force for, if you like, reducing the role of the state in the economy, which that's again a bit political, but some people would see that as having been an important role in the EU. And you're right, in many areas, it was often the E3, as they're sometimes called, the UK, France, and Germany, who were making decisions. But look, the UK will continue to play an important role in all areas of this policy. Just first, if we look at foreign policy, we can see on areas such as Iran, where the E3 continues to do good work. In fact, even during the Trump presidency, the United Kingdom was consistently joining with the E3 to defend the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on Iran, the JCPOA, when this was being undermined by the administration in Washington. Throughout the Brexit discussions. Similarly, if you look at China, we've just in the last few weeks seen new measures be introduced jointly by the UK, the European Union, and certain other countries in respect of the treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. And I think we will continue to see very strong coordination between the United Kingdom and the EU on foreign policy issues where this makes sense for both parties, and that will continue to be important. I mean, if we look at Western Balkans, for example, a place where Austria is very active, has 450 troops in KFOR, as I remember, And again, the UK is very keen to work closely with Austria and with the EU on security in the Western Balkans, which of course is crucial to Austria's own security. You mentioned the city, and of course, as they say, when you buy a savings product in the city, be careful because values may go up and they may go down. And similarly, when we look at the performance of the city, I mentioned the longer 20-year perspective, but it's quite interesting to look at what happened in a number of indices after the Brexit vote in 2016. And so, for example, between 2016 and 2019, if you look at London's share of over-the-counter derivatives worldwide, it actually rose, I've got the number here somewhere, from 38% worldwide to 50% worldwide. And similarly, if we look at FX, foreign exchange, that increased from 37 to 43%. Just today, I did a tweet about a new sukuk. Not everybody knows what a sukuk is, but having served in Istanbul, I know, and it's an Islamic compliant bond. And the UK has just issued its second sukuk for £500 million, which has been sold out. And I mean, you're right, there were some indications in January that on, I think it was share trading of European shares, that Amsterdam had overtaken London. But in many, many areas, whether it is arbitration, whether it's legal services, international legal services, whether it's insurance, London remains a very important centre. And indeed, the United Kingdom remains a very important centre. It's worth bearing in mind that although famously London has about as many people working in financial services as Frankfurt has people living in Frankfurt, there are also a lot of financial services jobs in Cardiff, in Manchester, in Leeds, in Edinburgh, and elsewhere. And those it is in the interests of the European Union that European businesses have access to the cheapest capital possible. And this really speaks for maximum interchange between the financial sectors of the UK and the EU. This is a win-win rather than a zero-sum game.
Yeah. Prime Minister Boris Johnson launched a future perspective just around about 2 weeks ago, the so-called integrated review, which shall outline more or less the future perspectives, the future guidelines, at least for foreign and security policy. Can you present us a little bit the major points, the major results, the major perspectives?
Certainly I could. I mean, this is a very ambitious document, which I have to say has received a pretty good response both within Europe and in Washington and elsewhere around the world. It's an attempt to set out the United Kingdom's place in the world over the medium term, that is between now and roughly 2030. And if I may, I've just set out two broad areas. I mean, first of all is what is the context of what's happening? And secondly, what are we going to do about it? So if you like, the context is that you have these big global challenges, which include climate change. I mean, that's really upfront and the biggest problem facing all of us. But also fighting against COVID. We have more extensive organized crime and terrorist organizations operating on a global scale. We have the activities of certain states which threaten to undermine our democratic norms and institutions. We have rapid technological change, such as artificial intelligence and cyber and data, which are going to change the way all of us live. I mean, quite extraordinary, really, if you look at the influence, for example, of big data on democracy. We have the rise of China, which is becoming an increasingly important player in the world. And we have, of course, rapid technological and economic growth across the Pacific Basin, if you like, and the Indian Ocean, including the Indian subcontinent. So the situation is changing in a big way. And the question is how we should respond to that. And I think, you know, the integrated review sets out 5 main areas. The first one is those global challenges where, as you know, the UK has the chairmanship of the G7 this year and is going to be holding the summit in Cornwall in June. We also have the UK also has the chairmanship of so-called COP26, the climate change conference. And this is a 5-yearly conference, which the last was in Paris in 2015. It's 6 years because it should have been held last year and we've delayed it by a year because of COVID. And at these 5-yearly conferences, governments get together and make legally binding commitments on reductions of emissions. And so this is a real chance for countries around the world to make a real step forward on climate change. So we're very excited about that, and we're trying to lead by example. Interestingly, the UK was one of the first countries to make a legally binding commitment to net zero by 2050. If you look at our past achievements between 1990 and 2018, the United Kingdom reduced its emissions by 43% while growing economically by 75%. So, you know, we've got a good record there, and we're really doing global diplomacy between now and the summit in November in Glasgow to try and persuade as many other countries as possible to be equally ambitious. And I'm glad to say Austria has done its bit, and many other countries, including China, actually, have made important new commitments. So that's one big area, is the global issues that face us all. And then the second area, which you may not think sounds much like foreign policy, but we think it is about science and technology. And the UK is very keen to invest a lot more in science and technology in terms of becoming a global leader in this area. And that includes £800 million to set up a new centre called ARIA, the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, which is designed, I mean, it's a bit like the IDS here in the ISD here in Austria, in Klosterneuburg, or the Weizmann Institute in Israel. It's designed to take high risk, high ambition scientific investment and turn it into big new ideas. But also across our education system, we will be promoting science and technology, and also internationally. For example, working with UNOSA, the UN Office on Outer Space Affairs here in Vienna, to regulate outer space more effectively, and looking at cyberspace, which is another important area of regulation where we're taking a strong interest. So that's, if you like, area number 2. If you bear with me, just another 3 quick areas I'll mention. The third one is values. You know, how do we act as a force for good in the world? And, you know, many people around the world will roll their eyes at the idea of a country being a force for good. You know, what does that mean? But actually, there's some really concrete stuff you can do to support free speech in different countries around the world, to push back against authoritarian regimes which try to limit freedom of expression, to encourage the education of girls. This has been a big priority in the UK for several years, because studies show that in terms of accelerating development in the developing countries of the world, the biggest, most effective investment you can make is in girls' education. And across all of these areas, gender inequality, human rights, as I mentioned, women's and girls' education, there is an enormous amount that we can do. And the plan is to focus more on that over the years ahead. And then the last 2, more predictable, if you like, they are, first of all, the UK, the United Kingdom, as a champion of free trade. It's always been this. I grew up in Manchester, and I mean, from ages 12 to 18, as you've already said. I came up from Lesotho, where I'd been living before that, and came to live in Manchester. And we used to go with my father to see concerts of the Halle Orchestra, at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester. I mean, how many other concerts have a concert hall that's called the Free Trade Hall? Because Manchester, indeed, the whole industrial revolution of the 18th century was and 19th century was based on the abolition of the Corn Laws, which enabled rapid industrialization and modernization of agriculture. So the UK has and always will be, has been and always will be, a champion of free trade, and that's an important plank of our new integrated review. And then finally, security. I've mentioned it already. Security. It's highly important. We're faced with a number of countries, including China and Russia, which are on the one hand important partners who we want to and have to work with on such ambitious goals as climate change or fighting terrorism or many other areas where they are vital partners, and at the same time in their foreign policies are sometimes adopting policies with which we disagree strongly, or which are potentially threatening our own security, as we've seen with Russia in Syria or in Crimea or in eastern Ukraine. And we need to be prepared for that. So one of the things that the integrated review and the accompanying defence review do is to increase the share of GDP that the UK will spend on defence from 2%, which is a NATO target which we already meet, to 2.2%, in recognition that the world is becoming a rather more dangerous place. So sorry to go on a bit, but it's a very ambitious and wide-ranging document, and I wanted to do it justice.
No, I think it's necessary to occupy ourselves because it's not only interesting and important for United Kingdom, but also for Europe, of course, because I think we also can get some profit out of it, can get some profit out of the discussion about it. I mean, if I look at the centers, the central messages, I would say, you know, there is certainly a review to maritime capabilities, to trade, new trade areas, sea trade as a very important question for the future, but also security questions like, I don't know, a leading role within not only home regions, but also outside, question of nuclear power for the future, and so on. How do you see this perspective, especially in the foreign policy and security field?
Well, I think it's a very bold and important effort to redefine the UK's role over the medium term. And you're right, it does include a number of global initiatives. As I've said before, you know, the UK is going to continue to work both within regional organizations, you know, working with the EU, but also working with a range of other networks. I mean, one of the most important such networks is the United Nations, where the UK is a permanent member of the Security Council and is extremely active, both in New York, in Vienna here, and in Geneva. We're also a central member of NATO, which has just got a remarkable record over the last 70 years of guaranteeing the security of Europe, but which also in some cases has had a worldwide role, acting in other regions. And then we have organizations such as the OSCE, also based right here in Vienna, where the UK is busy week in, week out. I have my colleague here, the OSCE ambassador, who is always very busy with a range of policy within the OSCE, ranging from freedom of speech and supporting of democracy through to the monitoring mission in eastern Ukraine, which is fulfilling an absolutely vital role in trying to maintain peace on the front line between Russian occupying forces and Ukrainian forces. So there's a huge range of things that we're very keen to do. And I mentioned values, where the example of the UK working together with the EU and other countries on sanctions on Xinjiang is quite an important recent new development. And I think the UK will be able, through this integrated review, to take a very carefully crafted approach to working both independently and with regional organizations, and of course with the EU where that is appropriate and makes good sense for both sides.
Yeah, you mentioned already different organizations. I mean, if we look more or less the global situation, of course, Great Britain is a major player within the old structures coming out of historic periods, but there are also new ones like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and as far as I understood out of Boris Johnson's presentations, this could be one of the goals, becoming a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Organization. So far, this certainly is quite interesting, and my question also is, do you think that this, my personal impression was that maybe there is a tendency that United Kingdom tries to react a little bit quicker than it did in the past in order to demonstrate its new freedom of action and its new capability of action due to the situation in Belarus, but also in Burma. When I just look at that, what is your impression about, this ongoing change in this respect?
Yeah, this is a very good point. Thank you for that. Certainly, I don't think you could accuse the United Kingdom of being late to this subject, having had such a global role for so many years. But certainly, the UK has been very active in those two areas you just mentioned, Belarus policy and also Myanmar. And if we look at the Indo-Pacific, there is a clear tilt towards the Indo-Pacific contained within the integrated review. I mean, that is the language that we use, a tilt towards the Indo-Pacific. And that includes a new enhanced trade partnership with India. It includes new trade and cooperation agreements with Australia and New Zealand. We've already agreed one with Japan. And you mentioned the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and we want to accede, to the comprehensive and progressive agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's also discussion of enhancing our defense role in the Indian Ocean and beyond, with a visit to the region by one of our new aircraft carriers in a group in the coming year, and also to base permanent ships in the region for the first time for a number of years. I think you've travelled very widely. I've done a certain amount of travel. I remember visiting Chennai in India a couple of years ago, and it's a booming, bustling city, and the Indian economy is set to grow very strongly. India is probably going to overtake China in terms of population fairly soon, and economically it has enormous potential to continue to grow. We have China, which in terms of purchasing power parity is getting quite competitive with the United States already, and in terms of standard dollars, i.e. not purchasing power parity. China is catching up fast as well. They've one of the few economies to show growth in 2020 despite coronavirus. So, and then there are many others such as Vietnam or Indonesia, which are also growing very quickly. So clearly there is enormous opportunity in this area. And certainly the United Kingdom is very keen to engage in trade with those areas and to build up our existing good relationships with those areas.
I guess there are excellent preconditions, of course, to your historic role in some of those regions, also due to same language in India, in Pakistan, at least partly, as in London, common cultural backgrounds and so on. But there's one big question for me. Do you think, this an Indo-Pacific strategy really can substitute the regional challenges you have? Because there's quite a difference, big companies, they can go and they have to go globally, of course. But small and medium-sized companies, for them, it's much, much more difficult. So far, there is this more or less overall rule, big companies can go overseas. Small and medium-sized companies can go cross-border, but most of the times not overseas. And do you think that that Great Britain really can substitute losses in the neighborhood with, I don't know, expansion in Southeast Asia or South Asia or wherever?
I don't think I used the word substitute at any point. So clearly, trade with the European Union and with our neighbours here, from whether it's Ireland or whether it's the Netherlands, whether it's France, Belgium, or of course Eastern Europe, a real growth region, those links will remain extremely important. And there is no question but that the countries of the EU and other European countries will remain an important priority for trade with the UK, both in goods and in services. And as I said earlier, I believe that that is a very much a win-win, both for those countries in the rest of Europe and for the UK. At the same time, one must look at the situation globally and look at which areas of the world are going to have the most economic growth over the medium term. And clearly, if you look at China, for example, if you had looked at it 20 years ago, its share of UK trade was minuscule. And now it's very significant. You could say the same of some other Far Eastern countries. So it's not a matter of substituting one for another. It's a matter of making sure that you're equipped to carry on trade with all regions of the world, particularly those which offer rapid economic growth and which are in future, in the next 10, 20, 30 years, going to be growing most quickly.
Yeah, you mentioned already a few times China, its enormous rise, of course, is a challenge for everybody. Everybody, as far as I say it, has to redefine his own position due to this enormous rise in almost every respect, and the question is now, you're already in the global review. China is seen as a systemic rival on the one hand. On the other hand, if I look back to last visit of Xi Jinping in Great Britain, this was more than just a friendly welcome for him. Some papers even talked about a so-called kowtow. So far, the question is, how do you think Great Britain can manage this way in between, on the one hand, to try to open its markets and to strengthen economic ties, but on the other hand, also to go a clear way. And I mention especially China because, of course, we are now in the situation, every day the papers are full of reports now about Hong Kong. This was not only a Chinese question, but for a very long time, a combined question for China and Great Britain. United Kingdom has made an agreement with China about this more or less two systems relationship and so on. Now things are changing. How do you look at it, and how do you think you can manage this way of having very clear value value-oriented policy on the one hand, and on the other hand also a successful economic politics?
So in the years 1995 to 1998, I had the great privilege to be working on UK policy towards the handover of Hong Kong. And I took part in some of the meetings of the Joint Liaison Group, which was a body set up between China and the UK with the Hong Kong government to look at all kinds of practical issues surrounding the future of Hong Kong. And as part of that, we had a number of meetings in the UK, in Hong Kong, and in Beijing. And during those visits, the Chinese on one occasion invited us to visit Shanghai. And I'd never been to Shanghai before. This was about 1998, I think. And even in 1998, it was staggering to see the economic growth taking place in Shanghai, the new motorway bridge over the river, Pudong, sprouting skyscrapers in every direction. And during that time, I took the opportunity to go and look at a new museum of Chinese history, which had just been opened, I think financed by a Hong Kong tycoon. And I was very impressed to see this. It was full of beautiful ancient objects, including objects which were several thousand years old, beautiful artistic bells and archaeological remains. And the message which came from this museum, loud and clear, was China has been around for a long time as an important power in the world. They like to describe themselves as the Middle Kingdom, and they've had their ups and downs like every country, and they had a tough 20th century, indeed 19th century, and now they're re-emerging onto the world stage in a very impressive way. And as you said very clearly, this poses both challenges as well as presenting opportunities. And the policy of the United Kingdom has always been to engage with China, to look for opportunities to work together in many areas. And really, there are many problems of the world which cannot be solved without working closely with China. One of the biggest is climate change, where the adoption by China of ambitious carbon or CO2 reduction targets is possibly one of the most important things that's happened in the world for quite a while. And their adoption of increased production of renewable energy, both solar and wind power, will also be very important. And they will be a major presence at COP26 in Glasgow in November. So that's really important. At the same time, the challenges that we see from China on, for example, the South China Sea, where there has been a clear ruling of the International Court on the South China Sea, which China has not yet chosen to respect, and where we're seeing a bit of, well, not a bit, we're seeing very major backwards movement on freedoms in Hong Kong, is a matter of grave concern. And I've already mentioned, and plus, of course, the challenges to human rights in Xinjiang, which we've already mentioned a couple of times. I mean, on Hong Kong, and I would mention that the joint declaration and the basic law, both which were agreed between China and the UK, both make clear provisions for the legislature of Hong Kong to be elected, and indeed for they have a target of the legislature and the role of the chief executive to be chosen by universal suffrage. So the latest measures which China has put in place, unfortunately, to restrain and bring under control any genuine democracy in Hong Kong are clearly a step backwards and do not fit in with the joint declaration agreed between the UK and China, and the UK has made that very clear. What can the UK do? We can certainly express our concern, and indeed on Xinjiang there have been some sanctions which have been introduced jointly by the UK and a number of other countries. And we've also seen in 2020 the British government opened an immigration route to the United Kingdom for the Hong Kong residents who were holders of a British national overseas passport, which was introduced after the handover in 1997. That's around 3 to 3.5 million people who henceforth, as of January, I believe, this year, have the right to settle in the UK. And if once they've lived there for 5 years, they can claim British nationality if they so wish. And, you know, it's not that we're expecting huge numbers of people necessarily to start flowing towards the UK, but it's a symbol of support for the people of Hong Kong because we do want to show our solidarity for them, and we do want to demonstrate that while we wish to engage in a friendly way with the important country which is China, at the same time we do have the agenda set out in the integrated review of values and of support for democracy worldwide.
Yeah, maybe before I ask the last question, just a short remark also, if you could make. I mean, the impression that British position versus Moscow is a little bit harder than versus Beijing. How do you see that?
Well, I served in Moscow 1992 to 95 at a time when Boris Yeltsin was president, and there was a general sense of optimism that we could be looking at Russia becoming a democratic country with shared values with the United Kingdom and other countries in Europe or in North America. A great deal of aid was provided to Russia. Hello, I'm being asked if I'm still here. I'm still here, yes I am. A great deal of aid was provided to Russia, assistance in dismantling nuclear weapons, and lots of economic assistance. The so-called know-how fund was set up. Everybody was very optimistic. And then after 2000, roughly, the situation began to deteriorate in terms of the UK's relationship with Russia. And then in the early noughties, we had the Litvinenko case, a very tragic case of a journalist who was poisoned with polonium in the UK, which really plunged relationships between London and Moscow into the deep freeze. Up to that point, we were really working hard to try and maintain good relationship with Russia. But that really presented difficulties to have somebody killed in the UK by Russian forces acting using dangerous radioactive materials. I mean, it's just an extraordinary, reckless act. We then slowly tried subsequently to rebuild our relationship, and I remember I think it was late in 2017, Boris Johnson, who was then the British Foreign Secretary, visited Moscow to try and have a reset to build things up. Quite a difficult time to be calling, but talks took place. And then in March 2018, there was the Skripal poisoning with a Novichok nerve agent. Again, pretty overwhelming evidence that Russian state agencies were involved in that, and you know, it wasn't a very encouraging response to our efforts to reopen, to improve the level of our relationship. We've also had, of course, Russian actions in occupying Crimea and in invading eastern Ukraine, despite having, contrary to treaties that they had signed with Ukraine, where they recognized the borders as they were already agreed, including Crimea and eastern Ukraine. I mean, a series of very severe measures. Now, as with China, naturally, we know that Russia is a terrifically important country with a great history. We've all read our Tolstoy, and we've all listened to Tchaikovsky and seen the Bolshoi Ballet, and it's an awesome, wonderful country. And we want to build up our relationship with Russia. We want to look for areas where we can work together. But incidents such as those I've described, and I haven't even got on to Russia's activities in cyberspace, where they are seeking to do all sorts of unfortunate things, including hacking the foreign ministry of Austria right here in Vienna. I mean, pretty strong evidence that was them. And not to mention 2 recent spying cases here in Vienna. You know, these are not the actions of a friendly country. So, you know, we want to be friendly with Russia. We want to reach out to the people of Russia. We want to work with them. But we really need, you know, it takes 2 to tango.
Yeah, we talked a lot about high ambitions and great perspectives. What makes you sure that Great Britain can develop this strength to achieve its goals, to march forward successfully?
Well, I'm always a great optimist in life in general, and I think that the UK has very strong institutions and a strong system of government and a very able people and economy. And interestingly, I grew up in the 70s in the UK at a time when British decline was seen as rather an irreversible thing. And since then, we've seen the UK catch up in very many areas. And when one looks at different areas of the British economy, which we promote, for example, I've recently been doing outreach on EdTech. Not many people may have heard of EdTech, but EdTech is educational technology, or FinTech, or all of the startups in the UK. I see a great education system. I see a very open economy. I see values that stand the test of time. So I think, you know, to step aside from politics, I think that the UK has good prospects and a very good chance of making a successful way forward in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I say an expressive word of thanks, I want to announce our next AIES talk. This will be next Wednesday in German language. And the issue will be Fällt Afghanistan an die Taliban? Will the Taliban overtake Afghanistan? Certainly the country is in a very crucial role. And I will discuss it with Dr. Markus Gauster of the National Defense Academy. So far, we are looking forward to next Wednesday at 4 p.m. And now I want to come back to you, Mr. Ambassador. It really was a great pleasure to discuss with you perspectives, present situation, and ambitions of United Kingdom, our future relationship within a common Europe, within a Europe that comprehends EU and also Great Britain as a factor, of course. I want to thank you for your open words and also for your optimist way to answer, the frank way. Thank you very much. It really was a pleasure. And I want not only to thank you, but I wish to you and to your family also all the best for Easter time. And I do the same for all our participants, all our followers. Once again, thank you very much for being with us although the weather is so fine and almost everybody automatically is thrown outside. Thank you very much. Enjoy Easter and join us next week on Wednesday with the issue of Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, and have a lovely Easter. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you. If you just maybe stay one more minute.